All right. So bees are common pollinators, and they feed in plants, usually eating the nectar that are produced in those flowers. And they take that nectar, some of it they use for energy as they're flying. A lot of that nectar they hold inside of their bodies and take it back to the hive, where they then use it and produce honey. We're going to watch a video at the end of class today all about how they do that. It's pretty interesting. They regurgitate that nectar they ate several times back and forth between various bees and turn it into honey, and then they store it. Flowers want to try to attract pollinators because that's going to allow them to reproduce. Okay? And once bees find a good source of nectar, an area where there's lots of flowers with good nectar, when they return back to the hive, they do that little waggle dance. And they waggle their butts and make these sort of figure 8 shapes. And that communicates to other bees exactly where they should go to find this source of nectar. It tells them the direction and the distance. And then the other bees can navigate there using the sun to find the same nectar. Flowers often have ways of attracting bees. They have special patterns of coloration that allow the bees to enter. And lots of times those are in ultraviolet colors that we actually cannot perceive, but bees can. This is a video we'll watch later. Other insect pollinators include butterflies and moths, which have a long proboscis that reaches into flowers to gather nectar. If it's a moth that's the pollinator for a plant, usually the flowers are light in color or white, might have a strong odor because they're pollinated at night by moths. There are also some flowers that would smell to us awful. They smell like rotting flesh, or they smell like rotting dung. And these are flowers that are meant to attract flies or beetles, things that generally break down rotting flesh and so forth. For example, flies will often land on these flowers, attracted by the smell of this rotting flesh kind of smell, and attempt to lay their eggs there, just like we're a piece of rotting meat, and in the process, get pollen on them and pollinate the plants. Okay. Birds are common pollinators, especially birds like hummingbirds. However, they're much larger than insects, okay? And they have good vision. So usually flowers that are trying to attract birds are very brightly colored. They usually don't have a strong scent because most birds don't have a strong sense of smell. And they usually have a lot of nectar. Because birds are so much larger and they're warm-blooded, they require a lot more energy than insects. And so a plant that's trying to attract birds often has a larger source of nectar to help attract birds to it. And also the shape of a bird's bill, pollinating birds, often fits perfectly into the shape of the flower. They've co-evolved together. Even mammals pollinate some flowers. Things like bats, they feed at night, so often the flowers are white in color. Other times mice could pollinate plants as they feed in them at night. So as we think about, you guys don't have this slide, I just want to talk about it. Comparing wind-pollinated flowers to animal-pollinated flowers are usually larger, colorful, have a strong scent or aroma, they have nectar to attract animals, and they don't need a ton of pollen because it's pretty, they're pretty confident that the animals pollinate them are going to get some pollen on them. Wind-pollinated plants often have very small flowers, they're not colorful. They don't have any scent or aroma because it's not necessary. They don't produce nectar because they're not trying to attract anything. And they produce very, very large amounts of pollen because they're just relying on the wind to blow it around and hopefully have it transfer from those anthers to the stigma of some female flowers. Corn is obviously a plant. And if you ever see corn growing in a field, do you ever see flowers on it?
Like purple ones, right?
They do have flowers. They have 2 types of flowers, actually. Okay, the male parts of the corn plant, the male flowers are these top things. Okay, you've probably seen those sticking out of the top of a corn plant. female parts of the flower are actually the silks of a corn. If you buy corn at the grocery store, you have all those stringy silk that you have to shuck off of it. Actually, each one of those is a style from the pistil. What's the fruit? What? The actual corn kernels. Each one is a single fruit, and inside of that is the seed. If you're able to carefully remove the leaves, the sepal of a corn, an ear of corn, and you didn't remove the silks, what you would see is it looks like this. Each kernel of corn has one of those silks attached to it because it's the style that pokes out of the top of the ear of corn so it can receive pollen. If you've ever, and this is what one single kernel of corn that still has the style attached, you see obviously it's very long because it pokes all the way up throughout the top of the ear of corn. And if you ever bought corn or help your parents like shuck the corn, you may notice the very top often doesn't have like kernels in it. It's kind of like round, it looks like this. Those are corn flowers that were not fertilized and didn't develop into a fruit. Okay? All the ones that are yellow and plump, those were pollinated. Some plants even have patterns that mimic insects. And what they do is they attract insects who think they're another member of the species. They try to mate with that flower, and in the process, they pollinate it. So once the pollen finds its way onto the stigma, you guys need me to go back?
So, like, what are those trying to, like, do?
What's that?
Like, what are those trying to?
They just are attempting to basically look like this insect. So it thinks it's another insect. There's an insect here. It's trying to mate with the flower.
Oh.
So once pollen lands on the stigma, the pollen grows a tube down the style into the ovary, and then a cell fertilizes an ovule. That fertilized ovule grows into a seed. Okay? And a seed is basically like a plant embryo. It has a couple things in it. Okay? The majority of the seed is made up of this cotyledon. Okay? So a seed is a matured ovule, forms inside of the fruit. And inside of that seed, there's the embryo, basically a tiny little plant inside of there. And then there's the food supply, the cotyledon. It's made of a starchy substance. That's why we eat seeds. What kind of seeds do we eat?
Pumpkin seeds.
Yeah, pumpkin seeds. What do we eat that you don't actually call a seed but is a seed? Some.
Chocolate.
What's that? Beans.
Or seed.
Yeah, beans are seeds.
And almonds.
Legumes are seeds, yes. So we eat them because they have a lot of starch in them. They have nutrients in them. They have energy in them. That energy was supposed to be for this little plant embryo, but when we harvest them, we use it. Okay? And then surrounding the outside of the seed is what we call a seed coat. Okay? Like if you ever have peanuts with the,
The shell.
not the shell,
It's
but
a
the
paper
skin
cup.
on them, that's the seed coat. It's a protective layer, and it protects the seed until it's ready to germinate. So those seeds, once they develop, they're dispersed. We talked the other day. If they just sort of fell to the ground, they'd be growing right around the parent plant and be competing with it. So that's not ideal. These seeds ideally would be dispersed or spread out to other areas. Okay? That's what dispersal means, spreading seeds to another area. Sometimes it happens by the wind. If you take a dandelion, you blow on that white dandelion, all those little things that come off, what's attached to each one? What? A single seed is attached to each of those little feathery things. So when you blow on that dandelion in your front lawn that you picked, you're spreading dandelion seeds all over your front lawn. and they're on those little cotton leaf fibers to help the wind carry them away. So when they mature, the wind blows, all those little seeds go drifting out in the wind. Some of them may fall somewhere farther away and start to grow into new dandelion plant. What kind of tree are these seeds from? You've all seen them. Do you know what the tree they come from?
Oh, they're
Haley said the right answer.
Anyone have these in their yard?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, what, you know what it is?
No, I have one of my friends.
They're maple trees. Those are maple seeds. What's the purpose of them?
To fly.
Yeah, those little helicopter motions, they have that little extension, that little blade, so that as they fall from the tree, they start spinning. If the wind blows, it'll disperse those seeds farther away. Even this is a coconut. Coconuts float. When they fall in the water, they float to a new area, wash up on the shore, and then they can start to grow into a new plant.
Wait,
Yeah, that's-
that look like a little animal.
Yeah, that's the plant growing out of the seed.
Wait, how does this eat?
Yeah, inside is a seed.
I thought that was an animal.
Now, one of the most common ways of seeds being dispersed is through animals. And plants that produce seeds that animals are going to disperse often form a fruit. Okay? And so the fruit attracts animals because it tastes good. They consume it. And they're not like a human. They don't like leave the seeds like I did on my pear over there. They eat the whole fruit. The seeds are not affected by the animal's digestive system. They pass right through the animal's digestive system and out as the animal goes to the bathroom. But that's going to be somewhere else. So those seeds have been dispersed. You've seen these before, right? Burdocks, we call them. They're birds. They are another dispersal mechanism because inside those burdocks are seeds. So the burrs stick to animals' fur. The animal moves around. Eventually they fall off, and then those seeds have been spread. They've been dispersed. Nuts. Some animals store nuts, bury seeds, like squirrels, and the next year don't dig all of them up. Some of those that they buried can start to grow into a new plant. And again, it's another way of seed dispersal. A really cool way of seed dispersal is through this plant. This is called I've always called it a touch-me-not. It's also called jewel weed. And so this is the fruit of the plant inside our seeds. And if I show you this video, when it's fully mature, if you touch it at all, it explodes and sends the seeds flying.
So sort of like a protective system.
Sort of, it's more to spread them out. So watch this guy as he touches. Okay, and you can find these in the springtime. You can find them all around here. If you look closely and you find these little pods, find some that are like plump and mature, and you just touch them, and they
Like
just
you don't even touch a bird.
no, you just like touch it, and it. So that's another means of seed dispersal.
Do you play full? What's left? Full like,
Not right now. What's that?
what's left? The seeds.
What's left is what's left over of the fruit, and the seeds won't fly. All right.
Seeds.
Maybe at the end. All right. So fruits obviously are a great means of seed dispersal in animals. It takes a lot of energy for plants to produce fruits, but they're more likely to be dispersed. Okay. Often fruits are brightly colored. They often have a lot of sugar. They taste good, and lots of different animals eat fruits. Okay. Digest them, and eventually those seeds go through the digestive system and end up in a new area. There's some bear poop.
Ew. The heck?
That bear was eating a lot of probably berries, and those are all seeds inside of that. Okay. There's a fox poop.
Why are you showing us poop?
There's some raccoon scat.
Why do we
With
do
those
that?
Yeah, scat is poop. So again,
Wait, why do we have to look at these? We just ate lunch.
that's all right. So you can see how these seeds are dispersed. All right, we'll watch this at the end of class as well.
Like tomatoes or vegetables.
So eventually, those seeds that were dispersed or spread out, they begin to grow. Okay? And that process is called germination. When a seed begins to grow, we say it has germinated. And seeds require certain conditions to germinate. So you could go to the store, and buy a packet of seeds. Are they going to grow in the packet?
No.
No, they don't grow until you plant them, because seeds are sort of dormant. And not until they have the right conditions will they begin their growth. What kind of things do seeds need?
Water.
Water is one of the most
So wait,
important.
Sunlight.
Because, hold on, as water soaks into the seed, okay, it starts to soften their coat on the outside so that the roots and the plant can actually emerge. It also activates enzymes, which are going to break down some of that starchy material in the seed for the plant to use as nutrients. What else do they need? Yeah?
Mine's not like a,
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My mom usually gets like flowers,
Yeah.
and like when she pulls them out to put them into like a pot or something, they have like the white roots on the outside. Why do like flowers have the white roots on the outside, and like trees have like a different?
It just depends on sort of what type of plant it is, but like soft flowers like have just, they're herbaceous, they only last for a year, and they just have softer parts, not the hard woody parts that tree roots would have. Kind of?
They need sunlight.
Not.
No, not sunlight.
Because where do you put seeds?
Nutrients and soil.
Put them in the soil, right? Do they get any sunlight under the soil?
Possibly.
No, so they don't need sunlight at first. When do they need sunlight?
When they sprout or bubble.
Once they emerge from the soil. They need oxygen. Okay? Because again, to break down the starch in that seed, they're going to digest it, and that needs oxygen. Respiration is going to happen. That requires oxygen. And finally, they need the right temperature. Okay? Seeds need the right temperature to allow the enzymes in them to work.
Sunlight gives them. Exactly.
Yes, the warmth under the ground. They don't need the sunlight, they need the warmth.
Well,
So here you see like steps in a seed starting to germinate and eventually grow. Here is sort of how it happens step by step. First, the seed is in the soil, it gets wet, swells up, the outer coat kind of breaks. Oxygen can then get in, and the seed starts to use up that stored food that's inside. A root emerges, okay, that starts growing downward to absorb more water. A stem emerges and starts to grow upward and eventually breaks through the soil. The seed coat is still attached for a little while. It will eventually fall off. These are called the cotyledons. And then the first leaves will start to emerge. And then it needs sunlight. Then photosynthesis is going to happen. It will no longer be using, it'll use up all the energy from the seed and start to get its energy from the sun. Now, everything we've been talking about is sexual reproduction in plants. Pollinating an ovule, then growing into a seed. But plants also can reproduce asexually. Remember, asexual reproduction,
A parent.
one parent, and the offspring are identical to that parent. And there's a few different ways that plants reproduce asexually. We'll just mention a few. Grass reproduces asexually by producing what are called rhizomes. Rhizomes are stems that grow under the ground horizontally, and then they break through the soil and grow into new plants. For example, this is grass. So you see a grass plant, and it sends out this rhizome under the ground, and then popping out from that rhizome are new grass plants. But they're the same plant as this one. They're just copies of the original. This is asexual reproduction. Some plants, like strawberries, do the same kind of thing, but they do it above ground. They send out a shoot that goes above ground along the ground. And then when it touches the ground, it grows roots that can grow into a new plant. Again, it came from just one original plant. That's asexual reproduction. Some plants can grow from what we call cuttings. So I have a couple examples of that back here. So if you take a cutting from a plant, sometimes like a leaf. I just took a leaf from this spider plant and I put it in some water, and you can see it started growing new roots. This is a new plant. But it came from just one original parent plant. This was produced by asexual reproduction. It's an exact genetic copy of the original. This succulent here, if you take one of these leaves off and put it in some soil, roots will grow and it'll grow into a new plant. But again, it's only one parent plant. This is a form of asexual reproduction.
So like, the leaves are kind of like seeds, I guess?
They can be. If a leaf falls off, it can grow roots and develop into a new plant. Now, one type of reproduction that humans do sometimes is kind of interesting, is grafting. In grafting, you take the stem of one plant, cut it, and then you insert a whole different type of plant into that cut, like this, seal it up, and it'll eventually grow together, and this will grow into the plant it came from. The bottom part's called the stalk, the top part's called the scion. It's joining two different plants. This is sometimes done in agriculture. This is a tree that was produced, and they took the root stock, and onto that they grafted two different scions. One, okay, that produced peaches from a peach tree, and one branch from a plum tree. They sealed it all up, it started to grow, and now you have a tree that one side of the tree produces plums, and the other side of the tree produces peaches. You've grafted two different types of plants together. Here's a plant, again, that produces two different varieties of apples. They grafted a golden delicious branch onto a gala branch, onto rootstock, and now both sides of that plant produce different types of apples. Okay, some plants are even carnivorous. Yeah. And carnivorous plants, sometimes you'll think, well, they must not be autotrophs because they're eating something. But they still are autotrophs. Okay? The reason they consume insects is because they live in soil that's very low in nutrients, like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. And so they can't get enough of those nutrients, so instead they get them by trapping and consuming insects. They still go through photosynthesis in the green parts of their leaves, but they use the digested insects as their nutrients that they can't get from the soil. This is a Venus flytrap. Some plants snap closed to trap their prey. Okay. This is a honeyed sundew. It has sticky stuff. Each of these is a little sticky resin that traps insects. This is a pitcher plant. Insects fall into the middle and then can't get out. All of these are ways of plants consuming insects. Gavin?
So how does an animal consume it? They don't have like teeth.
They produce enzymes, sort of like a fungus. They excrete enzymes inside that pod, and then they absorb the nutrients. All right, any questions about that?